Hello there. Welcome to Talk HR UK. I'm Simon Geere, and when I'm not talking to HR leaders on podcasts, I'm helping HR directors, MDs, and CEOs source and recruit the best HR talent in the southeast of the UK, as you hopefully already know. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by someone I've known a long time. This is Gavin Russell. Hello, Gavin.
Hi. I see you, Simon.
And you, sir, and you. So I met Gavin back in March 2009, which is a long time ago. At that point, I think, Gavin, you just left PA Consulting.
Yes. That's right.
So you'd been working in a sort of talent acquisition leadership role through businesses like Foxtel, DTZ, Centrica, and EDF.
Yep.
When we met, and certainly you went on to work for some fantastic, well-known brands, and some less so. So people like Skype, obviously, who at one point owned that market, and now I'm conscious we're not on one of their products now, so things change.
I won't tell, I promise.
But parts of AMS, Zapster, and obviously now you are doing your own thing. So really, if you want to take a moment to tell us a little bit, to start off with about what you do now and your field of work, please.
Sure. Well, what I do now is really very much a continuation of what you talked about, and it might help if I give you a little bit of context. Right. Most of the work that you just described kindly was, I was going to recruitment functions and I was doing a range of change work. So that could have been turnaround, that could have been scale, that could have been set up. Right? So I did a lot of that and I loved it and I got a lot out of it. And then I moved more into the management consulting side, so the full talent life cycle. But then I ended up writing a book, which I think I probably threw at you at one stage. There we go. And I published that July of last year, and that was really very much a culmination of frustration. And we might come on to that in the rest of our conversation. But I wrote this book very much as a cathartic process, but as a desire to help the HR community. And then I set up my own business, a company called Pepper Moth, and how I describe it, simply innovation, evolution within the talent space.
Excellent, thank you. And I should say, I've nearly finished this. I haven't just bought it and ignored it. So, and it's been fantastic. It's been my serious lockdown read. I'd like to put out alongside some lighter-hearted stuff.
Good. Well, I'm glad you mixed it with some lighter-hearted stuff.
I did, but no, I recommend it for people watching and listening. I do recommend Transformation Timebomb by Gavin Russell. There you go. Available from all good booksellers. I got it from Amazon.
As long as it's Amazon. And
yeah. Perfect. So yeah, excellent. So thank you for the intro. So we're going to dive straight in. I mean, Gavin and I spoke a little bit before we decided to do this, and I think we kind of titled this, why HR needs to become a leader before it can become a partner. But boiling it down, I think my first question has to be, what's wrong with HR, Gavin? What's not working?
Wow. It feels like quite a negative way to start.
Fair point.
I think there's a lot that's right about HR and a lot to be proud of. But my perspective is it's our operating model, our operating system that is not keeping pace with the changing demand of modern business, in a nutshell.
Okay. So tell me a bit more about the changing demands. I know that comes up in your book a lot. What's changing?
So we'll all be familiar. I mean, we know about speed. We know agility is the word that has been on everyone's lips for a couple of years now. But we also, customer experience, innovation, long-term relationships, loyalty, trust. We know that the commercial world has changed hugely over the last 10 years. And we call it the digital age, but roughly speaking, it's the last 10 years since the turn of the noughties to the teens. And so business has become a lot more about increasing revenue and a lot less about decreasing costs, because of all those changes. And that has a huge knock-on effect on HR. So you've got compressed windows that businesses need to operate in. So they need to find more people with the right skills at the right time to exploit opportunities or defend against threats. Increasing demand, increasing complexity means that there needs to be new structures, new workflows, new processes, new systems to keep up with the volume, the variety, and the velocity of that change. You've got the half-lives of skills that's plummeting. So that means you've got to find new ways of developing your competence and your capability and your capacity, because you can't have large permanent workforces anymore. The cost metrics don't add up. And then you come back to people. And I talk about people being the key factor of production. And I know we'll come back to that later on. But you've got people we've got to inspire distributed workforces to innovate, collaborate, and solve problems together. And there's a bunch of of different demands that are changing what it means, I believe, for HR.
Thinking about those points and the challenges to the modern age,
yeah.
What's the impact? I mean, how does HR fix that? What does it mean for HR, I suppose?
So, 4 things for me. Get ahead of demand. So I think we have to move away from this focus on the short term and the focus on service and the focus on reactivity, because we can't wait. It's not, we don't have time. So we have to move away from the short termist, what's the problem of today, and think much more strategically long term and get ahead of that curve. We need obviously to be agile, and I kind of cringe a little bit when I say agile because everyone says it, but it's a truism. Faster moving businesses need faster moving workforces. So what does HR need to do to make a faster moving workforce? Culture. Now, we've talked about culture a lot over the last decade, but I don't think people are really getting how much we need to invest in culture, because we've got to unite increasingly with distributed teams. We've got to improve that collaboration. We've got to improve that innovation. And that really, culture is the glue that does all of that. And I think we've not perhaps invested as much as we could have done in that side. And the last bit is distributed leadership. Right. With the complication, with the complexity, with the demand, with with new competitors, we can't funnel everything up through a single point of contact or a dozen points of contact. We need to be much better in inculcating autonomous leadership throughout our organization. And I just for me, I don't think a lot of HR models really, the penny's not dropped for a lot of them on that front. We still adhered or were geared towards those old definitions of HR value, task, service, compliance, policy. And that doesn't enable talent to do their best work. That doesn't enable businesses to get the maximum value. But importantly, it doesn't enable brilliant HR people to add the value that they're capable of doing. They're restricted by their operating system.
That's an interesting point. I suppose in my experience, I've obviously been recruiting in this market for too long, best part of 20 years now. And in that time, it's all been about the business partner model. Everything has been moving towards that. I suspect over the last 5 to 8 years, some organizations have been moving towards this agile piece, as you mentioned, and a few of the real big financial services institutions have led the way there. But that I still live in that business partner and business partner model space. What's the point of it, I suppose? Why does it exist, first of all, in your opinion? What do you think why has it become the kind of fait accompli for structures?
Well, I think it is founded in a fundamental necessity, and that is the connection of people to value, commerce. And I think business partnering is probably just as relevant today as it ever has been, if not more so. Right. I started out, I read Ulrich, HR Value Proposition, it's up on the shelf behind me, I think, in the early noughties. So I think he wrote it in 97, and I probably read it in 2003, 2004, something like that. And I totally got it. I thought it was brilliant. And I still do. I'm a fan of Ulrich. And I actually believe he was onto something really powerful there, in that he talking about the value of partnership, that confluence of where people meets the business, and therefore how we extract value, how HR gets a much stronger understanding of what's going on in the organization, how we can turn and direct talent to be able to operate in the most effective way. I think that's the point of HRBP model is absolutely about that value extraction. And I think it has never been more necessary than it is now.
Okay. So, but that said, why doesn't it work? Do you know what I mean? In your opinion, what would you say is fundamentally holding it back, I suppose, holding the industry back?
Well, look, there's no sort of simple, pithy answer to this, because the world is complicated, as I keep saying. There's not going to be a single solution that fixes everything. But I think for me, in many instances, the partnership model was undermined when it was first launched. Right. So, and let me sort of explain what I mean by that. I kind of think when business partnership came in, the logic behind it was sound. The right numbers there to support the logic. Everyone understood the concept, if you like. But what happened was it was kind of bolted on to what was already there. And let's talk about what was already there as a context setter. And it was what many people have traditionally called personnel. I think it had evolved a little bit on by the end of the 90s, early noughties. But plus or minus, it was still kind of in that space. And I'm going to go back a little bit to explain to explain the logic here.
Okay.
Personnel or HR shared service center, whatever it was at that stage, was the culmination of 150 years of Taylorian principles. Now, if people don't know, I'm sure most people know about Frederick Taylor. He was the guy that came up with scientific management. And the basic concept, you go into organizations and half the people in the organizations do the do, and the other half manage the people that do the do. Yeah. Everything is broken down into its constituent elements. And so everything is standardized, everything is regimented, driving efficiency, remove any sort of extraneous elements to it. And it's very regimented, and it's all about compliance. It's all about, you do it this way because this is what we've decided is the best way. And those Taylorian principles have governed business for 150 years. The production factory that Gerald Ford came up with is based upon that. I think Frederick Taylor was actually the management consultant that delivered and devised that. Right. So, you've got these, the concept that almost organizations are machines to be precisely programmed, right? Right. And therefore, HR, personnel, what evolved out of that was there to drive that, to support that, to service that. Sure. So you've got a traditional HR organizational design, which was very much built around tasks, support, quantitative metrics. How many people have got PDP? How many people have we hired this month? How many people have completed their annual review? It's very quantitative, task-based. Yeah. And then, so when BP when business partnering came in and got launched, it was kind of bolted onto the side of that. And that was kind of a confusing moment for the audience, for the business, because what you've got is hang on, we've got a business, we've got an HR function that's doing both operations and service, but it's also doing partnership. So what does that mean for me? I mean, I'm used to 150 years worth of service. I don't quite get what that is over there. I think that really undermined a lot of HR people, or HR business partners, because they were put into this horrible position where they're expected to be both sort of servant and leader, or servant and partner at the same time, and they could end up being neither. And they got caught between a rock and a hard place. And I wince a little bit when I hear the phrase trusted advisor. And it just makes me go, it still sounds like when people say that, they don't quite know where they sit. They don't quite know what value they're adding. Where am I on the hierarchy gradient? Because, organizations have become, through Taylorian principles, incredibly hierarchical. Yes. I don't know where I am. And therefore, what am I allowed to do? How can I add value over here? What's permissible? And I think that has trapped individuals, right? So I go back to the definition of true partnership. And if, just Google it, look up a true definition of partnership. You've got people that agree to cooperate to advance their mutual interests. So you have the same metrics, you have the same principles, you hold each other accountable to the same standards. It's very egalitarian. But then you kind of look at like an HR business partner job description online, and you'll see phrases such as serving internal clients, supporting others, driving compliance, writing policies, helping other people do, industrial relations. That's not partnership.
Agreed.
It's just not partnership. And that traps these HR BPs who have, I think, certainly the ones I've worked with, huge capability and potential. It traps them in what I call the HR doom loop.
What's the HR doom loop?
So the HR doom loop simply is, you get, HR is expected to do two things at the same time. It's expected to serve and operate and do everything that it's always done brilliantly, but it's also expected to fundamentally change how it operates and how it adds value. But it has to do it with the same amount of resources and the same amount of time and the same amount of budget. And what invariably happens is that it gets overstretched, because you've got people that are being pulled in all sorts of different directions. And with the best will in the world, HRBPs get sucked into the operational because no one's told the business that they're not supposed to be sucked into the operational.
Exactly.
So you get this overstretch. And then as soon as something breaks, and it always breaks, because you can't do, 2 and 2 don't make 17. When it breaks, it's used as evidence. The stick to beat HR with is, oh, you can't do it. You don't have the capacity to do it. We asked you to do this and you can't do it. And it kind of feels like they get sucked into this vortex of a self-fulfilling vicious cycle where underperformance and underinvestment, which breeds underperformance, which breeds underinvestment.
Yes.
And it makes me feel bad, right?
It's a good point you make, actually, because as you say, and we do hear that so often, and this resonates so much. I remember when genuinely, we would be talking to people some time ago who said, I don't want a business partner role. That style of HR isn't for me. I don't want to be a consultant or, you mentioned trusted partner. Another phrase that came up was uncomfortable companion. I remember that. It was be an uncomfortable companion to your MD or whatever business line manager, you were partnering with, I suppose. And it drove a lot of people towards what I guess we would now call, your employee relations specialism. So there were a lot of HR generalists in the old world who suddenly didn't want to be business partners and have gone that way. And they do a great job of it, and it's not to be knocked. That's a more, I suppose, a more binary transactional HR service rather than this consultation piece and leadership piece, which I think is where you're driving, isn't it, in terms of what HR should be doing?
Yes, yeah. I'm sure our conversation will evolve and we'll get onto it. I keep getting stuck on this concept that what HR calls HR business partnership isn't actually business partnership. Right. Too many interpretations of it don't actually encourage that collaboration and that equality. They actually encourage subordination. And until we address that part of it, we're doing a disservice to the talented HR people out there that are fighting really hard to do the best by their business, but are doing it one hand tied behind their back.
Understood. So, okay, so the spirit of being more positive than my first question, how should HR structure itself? What's a better version to offer that best level of support to the business?
So I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all structure.
Okay.
And I kind of alluded to earlier on, organizations are kind of unique, and therefore you're not going to be able to get a vanilla off-the-shelf solution that works for everyone.
Right.
But I do think there are some fundamental principles that should guide any structure. And I'll start off with HR should not be supporting, it should be leading. And to me, that's the gold standard, right? That is, I said earlier on about people being the key factor of production, and I'm quoting a guy there called Charles Schwab, who's the CEO and founder of the World Economic Forum.
Right. And
he wrote a brilliant book called The Fourth Industrial Revolution, which is really another way of saying the digital age. And in there he said people are the key factor of production. And so if they are the key factor of production, if they are the most important thing that business have at the moment, HR should not be in a support role, it should be in a leading role.
Okay.
The next part is redesigning around users and customers, not internal stakeholders. And this might be a little bit contentious, so I'm going to use an example to explain what I mean by that.
Right.
I work for an organization who shall remain nameless. And I was doing a change within their talent acquisition space. And there were only two metrics that company cared about within talent acquisition. Really, they measured a lot of others, but there was only two they really cared about.
Right.
One was their annual budget, headcount budget.
Okay.
And two was something they charmingly referred to as butts and seats, which was how many people they'd hired month on month.
Yeah. Okay.
And those were two really core financial metrics that were about cost. Actually, let's be honest, they were about cost saving. They were about managing our cost. And that's okay if that's what you want your business to be. They completely ignored users and they completely ignored customers. The people that wanted to use the products of that business didn't factor. And indeed the users, and I'm going to say users, people, talent and line managers, where were they in those metrics, right? So when I talk about redesigning about users and customers, it's very much thinking about what is the value you're generating, and not getting diverted away from people who are in the business that try and tell you what their agenda is important. It's not, it's what the customers and what the users want that's important.
Right.
And really another way of saying that is focusing on maximizing talent value, not minimizing talent risk or cost, right? So it's just more of a mindset. And I talk about structures then being designed for constant evolution. So not standardization, it's about designing a structure that is constantly evolving to its environment.
That sounds challenging, I would say. What does it mean? Tell me a bit more.
Sure, it is challenging, but I think the alternative is ineffective.
Okay.
I'll come on to that. So what do I actually mean? So it is not a new concept, but I very much buy into this idea of organizations as organisms, not as programmable machines, as robots.
Okay.
And what I mean by that is, they're in a competitive environment, which is constantly changing. They've got constant threats, limited resources. Their success is about their inherent variety, because the more variety you have, and that's another way of saying diversity, the more variety you have genetically, the more capable you are able to adapt to your environment. So and being able to do it faster than the competition. So I look at organizations absolutely as organisms, not as robots. Right. So when they apply that to HR and HR structures, it's the same. HR adds value in a unique way as much as the business adds value to its customers in that type of environment. And so I was inspired by a couple of OD experts, Arthur and Jane Ray Jones, who run their own business and did some phenomenal work in a large FMCG business. But the structure that they allocated was almost or the approach to structure was to redesign backwards. And it was to understand what you thought your changing commercial environment was. And they talked about the difference being too narrow in what your business is. Blockbuster's the obvious example here. We just do DVDs in a shop, and that we know what happened to them. Mm-hmm. Or too broad. I think it was Unilever, which is an example. It could be Procter and Gamble, who they did dog food, they did batteries, they did beauty products. They did. I can't remember.
Anything you buy.
Pretty much. And so what does that mean? So I think there's this whole redesign backwards bit, which is understanding what your environment is and what your business actually is. What does your HR function need to do today and tomorrow, as much as you understand what that future might be? Do the gap analysis. And I don't want to tell people how to do OD, because HR people are experts at OD, but I think it's kind of figuring out what the core workflows are based upon that gap. Then, and this is the crucial bit, is have that constant feedback loop to understand how your business is changing. And you're almost putting in what I call the minimum viable structure, or the minimal viable product, which is totally stolen from the product environment. Is you get an MVP, or a minimal viable solution, which gives you the core, but it also means you don't over-engineer it to give you the flexibility. And I think that's one of the things that HR kind of has got wrong. We've gone to this idea of a fixed system. Let's make it really structured and rigid and
defined.
Exactly. And we'll have these long processes, and they'll be very detailed, and people have to go through all of them. And this is your role here, and that's your role there, and here's the and it becomes unwieldy and complicated and slow. And I just think we have to switch away from this concept of that fixed view and move towards something which is about reducing our organizational drag, simple workflows. And the big one for me, and this is probably the biggest one, is a connected HR function. When we talk about structure, to think about HR structure in a fundamentally different way. If we take, as HR professionals, if we take a step away from looking at what we do from the inside out and look at it from the outside in, and we look at our users and we look at our customers, they have one experience with us, right? Yeah. They have. So if you're a candidate, you've got one experience finding out about a business via websites, social media sites, whatever it might be. One experience going through the recruitment process. One experience, continuation of the same experience, hiring into the business. And then maybe as an employee experience going through, and then one experience going through, promotion review or talent review or annual performance review, whatever it might be. And then one experience of alumni and going out the other end. It's one experience with one company as far as they're concerned. But what we do as HR is we split it functionally. We have recruitment over here, and recruitment will do this bit, and generalists will do this bit, and the BPs will do this bit, and the L&D guys will do this bit. And we kind of approach the structure functionally based on tasks, not upon results, not upon the experience that our users go through and that our customers expect. And I think if we shift that and think about that fundamentally differently, that massively helps us put the right structures in place for HR, a more fluid, dynamic HR system.
Wow. So that almost feels to me, just listening to you, it's sort of, it's turning that business partner piece on its head, which, because I always feel that's what that set out. Although it promoted that consultative partnering piece, it does compartmentalize a lot of the tasks. And I think I see that in the HR market. I see people they're very, very quick to point out their specialism. This is the box I fit in, although I can do a bit of everything. They all like to sell themselves a bit, but they all seem to have their loudest drum that they like to bang. Which is, so this is big. So for the people out there that are thinking that this is, our HR function is set up, we all have boxes that we live in and create those one-off experiences throughout an employee life cycle, which you're saying isn't the best way of working. Where do they start? If they're looking for a bit of inspiration on how to restructure their processes, their structure, what do you recommend?
Well, I think if you look at organizations that are experimenting with new solutions or new ways of structuring themselves. So I'm going to go completely mind blank here because obviously we're being recorded and my brain's not but there's, there are management systems like autocracy, or there are, player leader sort of models that come into play. Mm-hmm. I think though that the key thing is we are seeing within the work environment, we're seeing a shift away from role-based work to project-based work. And I think that's the same model that HR has to flow. In fact, I think that's the same model that HR has to lead on. So if you think, you've got organizational structures that are pivoting from the vertical to the horizontal. So, and I've got a chapter about this, which I'm sure you've read in the book, which is very much around how you drive value based upon the output, the outcome, not the output. So instead of organizing yourself with marketing, and we're engineering, and we're finance, we organize ourselves by, we're going to create, improve customer experience, which is a horizontal. And so you construct teams that are geared towards that result, not construct teams that are geared towards those siloed tasks. Yeah, I think the same thing happens for HR. Is HR needs to look at how it adds value to its organization. And I know we'll come on to that. But then look at the structure that enables them to do that better. And it doesn't make sense to me to organize that around the traditional tasks we've had. Is to identify what that value creation is. What is the value to be gained or the value at risk, and then organize around that. So it might be, you're launching a new product and therefore you need a particular suite of skills in a particular area. You're looking at building towards, that product launch and the success of that product, not we need to get C++ or Python or whatever skill you might be looking for. It's a different way of looking at that same challenge. And I think borrowing from people like Twitter, who organize themselves around, chapters and I can't remember now. They've got weird names for it, but different ways of organising how they produce their products. I think that's absolutely the way that HR could copy and evolve.
Interesting. So it's, as you say, looking at it piece by piece, and it's interesting, isn't it? Because some people are probably sitting back here and thinking, but how do you, that's a bit knee jerk. It's short term. It's how do you build a long-term strategy? How do you find those skills to do that? Because it's hard enough running a defined HR business partner structure, but I guess it just needs a strong leader on a board who can see through all that and learn to move in a project-based way, as you said earlier, I guess.
Yeah, I think, again, it's this change in mindset from what are the tasks we're doing to what is the value we're delivering. And I think the structures naturally flow from redefining what your definition of value is. And it really, that's what we're talking about, a new definition of HR value. But once you've done that, it's actually, there's a lot of places to get inspiration from about how you change the structure to be able to do that. But to go back to your point about doing it at board level, that's kind of, that's easy and that's hard at the same time. Right. Because certainly from the research I've done and from the senior level people I've spoken to, there is huge demand for a much more value-oriented HR function than a task-oriented HR function. I think Nick Holly, who works at the Henley Business School, he did this report. It's probably 5 or 6 years old now, but he did this really thorough report back in, I think it was 2014, about what CEOs wanted from their HR. And it was enlightening in that it started sort of attacking those shibboleths that we'd been so used to for so long within HR, which was, oh, HR just wants us to do, we need to do the basics right. Yes, but that's table stakes. Yeah, that's the minimum. We need so much more than that. The challenge comes with the rest of the board and being able to impress on them what is vital, what's important. And, we go back to this thing, which is HR people asking for a seat at the table being the board. And again, that you cannot create these powerful, long-lasting, value-adding initiatives if you're sitting at a table waiting for someone to ask you a question, right? Sitting at the table is not enough. You can't design and deliver these amazing people interventions if your primary focus is about advice or facilitating conversations. Well, let me just help you do that. You've got to be so much more proactive. You've got to be, you can't wait to be asked. You've got to get on the front foot. Right. And so that to me, for all of HR, but particularly at the board level, at a senior HR level, is being a business leader, not a support leader. HR should not be a cost center or a service center. It is a value center. You can call it profit center if you want, whatever works for your organization, whatever inflection point you're at, but it is not a cost center. It shouldn't be perceived as such. Again, back to this concept, people are the key factor of production. Well, if they're the key factor of production, what do we do to optimize the value from them? What can we do for them that enables them to increase their performance? And how does HR pull all of that together so they end up doing the best work of their lives? So, I talk about, and I know you haven't necessarily prompted me this, but you've got me on a roll here. I talk about speed to value, not speed to service. And that's a section in the book. And the more I get into that, the more I sort of believe in this concept of entrepreneurial HR. And I was prompted very much by a guy called Sandy Ogg. And Sandy Ogg was the CHRO of Unilever. And he was there for a couple of decades, did some amazing work. And then he left to set up his own business. And he went into PE, private equity. And he discovered when he was working in private equity, there were two things that always had to be right in any investment. First off, they've got to buy the right asset at the right price, which is fairly straightforward. But the second thing, enough of the right people to create value in a compressed timescale. Right. So for him, HR value was about connecting talent to value to create speed. Right. I think that is the kernel, the core of what transforms HR structures in the digital age, is to move towards what is driving value in your organization, what does give you competitive advantage, what is your value at risk, how do you get ahead of the curve and ahead of demand, how do you reduce drag, how do you innovate? And I think all of those things are absolutely key in terms of repositioning HR at a board level, but throughout the organization. And the last bit I'd say on this, because I think I mentioned at the beginning, which was repositioning with the board, because they can sometimes be the problem. When I was interviewing for the book, and I did a lot of stakeholder interviews for the book, I interviewed an ex-board member of a FTSE 100 company. And I was asking him questions about his, a range of different factors, but one of them was around the future of HR and what it was. And I started talking about, people, key factor of production, HR being the most important role, and he just started laughing. And it was one of those moments where you go, "Oh, this is worse than I thought."
It's awkward, yeah.
He's retired. He was no longer in the business, but the concept in his head that HR was a equal within the board environment was just so far from where he was at. Now, clearly he'd been brought up, most of his career was in when HR was personnel, and you understand that, it was all contextualized. He was still a senior individual that had all of this baggage. And I think one of the core things that we have to do is get HR to do all of that and actually be able to completely reposition it within their environment, within the rest of the board and the rest of the structures within the organisation, to be able to make sure it filters down further from there.
Completely, and that's. I completely agree, and you mentioned that, and this is probably someone, as you say, who is long retired, and HR wasn't on his radar as a strategic leadership function in that business, but that still exists in volume in a lot of businesses, particularly in the SME space. So that's an ongoing battle. A lot of the people listening will understand that. So, well, how do they improve then? So these HR leaders, what perhaps skill set or even mindset is missing to enable this progress, in your opinion?
Well, I don't think it's fair to say it's missing, because it might be there. We just can't see it because there's no opportunity for them to show it.
Sure.
Certainly many of the HR people I've worked with have been amazing, really skilled, intelligent, capable individuals, but they've also been really stifled. So, I kind of felt their pain when I was working with them, but I felt the same way. But look, let's assume that we're talking about a blank sheet of paper here. I'm going to go back to my favorite word, which is entrepreneurialism. And this is not just about taking risk. I mean, there's a very traditional view about entrepreneurialism being taking financial risks, but it's not that really for me. It's yes, there's absolutely about financial and analytical acumen. It's about data interrogation. It's really understanding the numbers and the metrics and the indicators and the opportunity, and having that properly evaluated. But it's also about intellectual versatility. It's also about customer centricity. I think, and Ulrich talked about this, is that we should be talking, he talked about this 25 years ago, which is we should be thinking about the customers, not the internal stakeholders. And that's as true today, if not more so. And it's also about courage. HR has a bloody hard job, right? And we're battling 150 years of ingrained perception. And,
historical perception, yeah.
Exactly. And that's not necessarily anyone's fault, but we've got to change that. We've got to change that dynamic and the narrative. And it's going to take courage and resilience to be able to do that. So entrepreneurship, first one. Second one, divergent thinking. And I look at divergent thinking as the building blocks of creativity and innovation. Do not underestimate how innovative HR now needs to be. We're talking about the demand, the increasing demands, the complexity, the volume, variety, velocity of change. We're going to need to change a lot more often than we ever have done. We're moving away from this rigid standardization, compliance approach to a much more fluid one. The bedrock of that is innovation, the bedrock of that is actually divergent thinking. And if anyone wants to look at something that helps understand that, look at a video by Sir Ken Robinson. Sir Ken Robinson is a British educationalist, if that is such a word, that's based in the US. And he does this amazing video that talks about, it really bemoans the challenges we have within modern academia about the way that we sort of steer children towards a predefined version, how we crush their innovation and how we crush their creativity as they go through school. So look at that video, that's brilliant. But I think HR actually has to have that in spades, because creativity or divergent thinking is the foundations of agility and adaptability. And we need to be more agile and adaptable than anyone else. Next one, digital literacy. This is not about being technical. Technology will come and go, and it will come and go faster than you know about it. So, I talked about the plummeting skills, half-life of skills. We'll get new technologies coming in all the time. Learning a technology will be helpful, but it won't solve all the problems. Yeah. So for me, this is absolutely about combining technical reasoning and social skills with the ability to provide technical solutions in the modern world. So it's more of a mindset than a skill set. Okay. And then the final one here is EQ. Now, you'd argue that HR has EQ in spades, and I think that's absolutely true, and I think it's a huge strength that we should be playing on. But I think it's important to also signpost the difference between EQ and empathy. And I think empathy is about putting yourself in someone else's shoes and understanding their point of view, and I think HR is brilliant at doing that. However, I think the flip side of that is EQ is actually about managing your emotions and the emotions of others. Right. And I just don't, and I think that's a huge opportunity that's slightly untapped for HR at the moment. You know, it's almost in the coaching space that I think I'd like to see a lot more HR people go.
Okay, interesting. So that's a great opportunity for them to, develop and hone their skills and look at the offering. Well, I mean, we dipped into both finances and technology in that answer, and I suppose that's something I hear over and over again from HR professionals frustrated with their function service offerings. So, you know, how can and how does HR justify the expenditure effectively to continue this automation process? A lot of transactional HR is going over to tech, and those roles are falling away, and new skills are being brought in as a result, which allows a more agile project-based approach, which is what we're talking about getting to. So, I mean, firstly, can HR justify that spend? Will businesses spend the money?
Well, this is the trite answer, which is, can you afford not to, right? So, because, you know, the change is happening anyway. The automation, AI, it's happening regardless. And you can't stop other organizations from inventing new ways of doing HR. So the question then sort of becomes, if machines are able to do anything repeatable, if we don't own that and take control of that and do it first, it's going to be done to us. And if it comes down to, do you want to control your own destiny? So the question is, can you justify the expenditure? I think it's kind of the wrong way of looking at it for me, which is, it's not about really justifying the expenditure. It's about articulating the value creation that comes from making those changes. And I said it before, HR is not a cost center, it's a value center. It's not about tasks, it's about results. And so if you can articulate the change based upon, here's what we can do, here's the value we can add, and you have to put numbers around it. If you're entrepreneurial HR, you have to put numbers around it. You have to put, shared risk. You have to tie that back to the commercial objectives of the business. But if you can structure that in such a way, then that becomes a much more binary decision for the people that might be approving your budgets. And, the simplest way of putting it is, you're not asking for more money, you're changing how you spend your money in a more cost-effective way. Which CFO and which CEO isn't going to be supportive of you going, let's take the money and extract more value from it?
Okay, interesting. All right, so it's still getting that business case together, isn't it? And and the good news is we are seeing that more and more, and we're seeing far more HR data roles in the market now. There is a broader skill set there, and the tech obviously gets better and better and better as each year passes. Interesting. So, okay, my final question for you, Gavin. So, a lot of what we've spoken about today does point in that agile direction. So, agile HR it exists. A lot of people are doing it. Is that the way forward as a model? What's the alternative to agile HR if we're looking forward now for HR?
Well, I kind of look at it as that agile is sort of the output rather than the input. We want agile business. So, let's go back a step. Businesses want to be agile. So if you want an agile business, you need an agile workforce. You want an agile workforce, you need agile workflows. If you want agile workflows, you need agile processes, systems, blah, blah. So you need an agile HR that can do all of those sorts of things. So it's, okay. I think it's a truism almost. Yes, we want agile. But I think it's more than that. I think it's building on this idea of being just about agile, and it being, back to this idea about organizations as organisms, not as programmable machines. It's about this awareness of what's happening outside the business, not just what's going on inside. It's about your genetic diversity, as in the people that exist in your organizations and the breadth of their skills, capability, knowledge, and experience that gives you the building blocks of adaptability. It's about the ability to change faster than the competition. So, and agile for me sort of manifests in a slightly different way, in that, if we go back to the speed to value, if we go back to the innovation, if we go back to getting ahead of the curve, if we look at self-sufficiency, because that's really what many HR functions need to do is become not only so much more used to this change, and adaptive, and being able to adapt, but not having to outsource it to external consultancies all the time. They need to become agile themselves. And so we're back to this entrepreneurial HR, which is really how do we create a business within a business that actually is thinking much more, how do I add value? What are my factors? What are my variables? What I deliver at the end of that is an adult HR, but what I put into it is much more of a business-driven, commercial-driven entity that's less about that, the processing of tasks, and much more about the creation of value.
Understood. Okay. Hey, look, Gavin, you've been very generous with your time today, because I know you're busy. But I suppose what I wanted to put out there was, if for the HR folk listening to this or watching it, if there are things that you really agree with or strongly disagree with, I mean, we've given the business partner model a bit of a kicking today. Well, we've certainly dismantled it. We've talked about the skill sets required to be developed. If you've got a view on this, and we'd really love to see your comments. And I'm sure, Gavin, you'd perhaps one day a little round table event we could do. If there's someone who disagrees, it'd be good to take this forward. But I'm assuming, are you happy for people to reach out to you through LinkedIn? I'm guessing is the obvious one. But
they could LinkedIn or my website, peppermoth.live. There's a contact me thing that people can use. And send me questions. You don't need to have to commit to any level of relationship. You can ask me questions there, and I'll do my best to answer them as best as I can.
Fantastic. Hey, look, it's been great to reconnect with you, Gavin, because we've been talking for too many years, we've discovered earlier. But really lovely to have you on this. Thanks for being a guest and being so generous with your time.
Well, thank you very much. It's been enjoyable.
Great stuff. I will obviously get this out there. We're always looking for guests. So if you're listening and watching this and think you've got something to say, please do get hold of me via LinkedIn is the easiest way. And we will see you all next week. Thanks for your time.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Cheers, Gavin. Bye.